At 11:07 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I was sitting at the kitchen table, lights off except for the stove hood, scrolling through freight delays for the next morning. I answered without thinking. A man's voice came through loud and sharp, already mid-sentence, like he'd been rehearsing. He said he was living with my wife. Said she had chosen him. Said she finally found someone stronger. He laughed while he said it, the kind of laugh meant to land on your chest and stay there. He wanted me small, embarrassed, reactive. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk himself out. I listened to the cadence, how fast he spoke, how often he circled back to the same phrases. Men who are confident don't repeat themselves that much. When he finally stopped, there was a pause where he expected me to collapse or lash out. I didn't. I said, calmly, "You tried to humiliate me. You dropped one detail." Then I ended the call. I didn't block the number. I didn't need to. I opened my photos and selected one image. Nothing dramatic, just precise. A document photographed cleanly, date visible, clinic name in the corner. I sent it. The typing bubbles appeared for a moment. Then nothing. No reply. No follow-up call. Just silence. I set the phone face down on the table and went back to my notes, finishing the line I'd been writing when the call came in. The house was quiet again. Not peaceful, just quiet. And in that quiet, I understood something had already ended. Before that call, my life ran on schedule and repetition, the kind you don't notice until it's gone. I worked logistics in Kansas City, the unglamorous side of movement. Freight windows, vendor emails, late trucks, the quiet math of getting products where they needed to be without anyone ever thinking about the people behind it. I liked it because it was honest. A shipment was either there or it wasn't. A promise was either kept or it wasn't. Most mornings, I ran before the sun was fully up. 2 or 3 miles through the same neighborhood loops, breath steady, shoes hitting pavement in a rhythm that made my head quiet. I'd come home, shower, and drink coffee while Emma moved around the bedroom getting ready. Hair in a towel, phone in her hand, answering messages that always seemed urgent. She worked in a field that came with titles and conferences and the kind of networking that sounded important even when you didn't understand half of it. Industry forums, she called them. Sometimes it was Chicago, sometimes Dallas, sometimes a city I'd never been to and couldn't picture beyond the airport. I didn't resent it. Not at first. We had a pattern that looked normal from the outside. Shared weekend dinners, a couple of friends we saw on rotation, the same grocery list, the same shows we half-watched while scrolling. We weren't newlyweds anymore. We were two adults managing a life. And most of the time, I thought that meant we were doing fine. Emma traveled more as the years went on. It started with once every few months, then once a month, then stretches where she was gone twice in 3 weeks. She'd pack with practiced speed, rolling clothes, chargers, laptop, a blazer folded carefully like it mattered more than the rest. She'd kiss me, promise she'd call, and then be gone. I'd watch her taillights leave the driveway and go back inside, the house already quieter. There were small oddities, but I filed them where I filed everything inconvenient. In the back of my mind, under work pressure. Her phone started living face down on counters. Her passcode changed once, and she laughed it off like it was nothing. She'd come home tired but wired, talk fast about people she met, without saying much about what they actually did. Some nights, she'd fall asleep with her laptop open, emails still glowing on the screen. Other nights, she'd stay awake scrolling, thumb moving too quickly, expression blank. I told myself she was building something. I told myself I should be supportive. When she came back from trips, she'd bring little things, airport candy, a keychain, a shirt she said she saw and thought of me. It was enough to make me feel included, like I was still part of her world even when I wasn't physically there. And I did what a lot of husbands do when the person they love starts drifting. I worked harder at being easy to live with. I didn't question late returns. I didn't make comments about the muted phone. I didn't ask why a 2-day forum needed a 4-day hotel stay. I assumed she had reasons I didn't understand. I assumed she'd tell me if something was wrong. Sometimes she'd come home and go straight to the shower, like she wanted to wash a city off her skin. Sometimes she'd hug me a little too tight, like guilt trying to impersonate affection. I noticed, but noticing isn't the same as accepting. I kept choosing the version of reality that let me sleep. Looking back, I can see how convenient that was, for both of us. I can also see how the trust wasn't something she earned every day. It was something I handed her once and then defended, even when the details started asking questions. The details didn't change all at once. They lined up slowly, the way freight cars do when a yard finally settles into order. At first, I noticed receipts. Not because I was looking for them, but because I handled our shared expenses out of habit. Same hotel name appeared twice in 2 different months, in 2 different cities. I told myself it was a chain. Lots of hotels look the same when you don't think too hard about them. Then I noticed rideshare logs. Same drop-off location repeated across trips that were supposed to be conferences with packed agendas. I didn't confront her. I didn't even mention it. I just stopped explaining it away for her. That was the first shift, small, internal, quiet. The scent came next. A cologne I didn't own, sharp and unfamiliar. Clinging to the collar of a blazer, she hung back in the closet without folding. I held it longer than necessary, breathing it in like evidence, not accusation. I put it back exactly where it was. Nothing said. Nothing changed on the surface. What changed was how I listened. I started hearing the rhythm of her explanations instead of the words. The way she used generalities. Everyone was there. The days just ran together. You know how these things go. She stopped naming people. Stopped giving specifics. When I asked how a trip went, she'd answer with conclusions instead of events. It was efficient. Defensive without sounding defensive. I didn't ask follow-up questions. I let the gaps exist. Patterns don't announce themselves. They assemble. A hotel stay that extended through a weekend when the forum ended Friday afternoon. A car rental build, but no mileage to match. A calendar invite labeled panel discussion that overlapped with nothing I could find online. Each item by itself meant nothing. Together, they stopped being coincidences. I remember the exact morning it clicked. I was tying my shoes for a run, early, dark outside, house quiet. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She'd left it there charging overnight for the first time in months. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The screen lit up just long enough for me to see the preview. No name. Just a sentence that assumed intimacy already existed. That was when I stopped participating emotionally. Not in anger. In clarity. I ran longer than usual that morning. My breathing evened out, and with every step, the story I'd been telling myself loosened. I realized how much effort it had taken to keep believing everything was fine. Belief, I understood then, was work. Observation was easier. From that point on, I treated my own marriage like a system audit. Inputs, outputs, timelines. No judgment. No drama. Just data. When she spoke, I listened for alignment instead of reassurance. When she traveled, I noted dates without comment. When something didn't match, I logged it mentally and moved on. She didn't notice the shift. Or maybe she did and mistook it for trust. I slept fine. Ate normally. Went to work. From the outside, nothing changed. Inside, I had stopped inventing excuses. I had stopped needing her story to make sense. The pattern was complete. I didn't need proof yet. I didn't need confrontation. I only needed to stop lying to myself. And once I did that, everything else became simple. The moment I stopped trying to fix it was quiet enough that no one else could have marked it. There was no argument, no discovery, no line crossed in front of me. Just a decision I made while standing at the sink one evening, rinsing a plate she hadn't touched. I realized I was the only one still attempting maintenance on something already decommissioned. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. I didn't announce anything. I didn't withdraw affection dramatically. I just stopped reaching for solutions. Before that, every small distance between us triggered a response in me. I adjusted my tone. I asked better questions. I suggested dinners, weekends away, shared plans. I treated the relationship like a delayed shipment, assuming if I followed the process closely enough, it would arrive intact. That night, I accepted a simpler truth. Some things aren't delayed. They're rerouted. After that, my behavior didn't change in ways that would raise suspicion. I still asked how her day was. Still listened. Still nodded in the right places. On the outside, I was cooperative and calm. Inside, I had stopped volunteering emotional labor. I no longer tried to bridge gaps she created. I let them exist at their actual width. It felt less like giving up and more like stepping back into balance. I slept better once I stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen. I ate without that low-level tension that comes from hoping tonight might be different. I didn't scan her face for signs of guilt or warmth. I let her present whatever version she wanted. My job was no longer to interpret it. There's a point in a long project where you realize repair costs more than replacement. That doesn't make the work meaningless. It just changes the objective. I wasn't angry. Anger requires expectation. I had released mine. I stopped imagining future corrections. No more if we just talk, or once this busy season ends. I understood that momentum had already shifted, and trying to counter it would only exhaust me. So I conserved energy. I focused on what I could control: my routines, my finances, my timeline. The decision not to rescue something already gone brought a strange calm. It removed urgency. Without urgency, there was no impulse to confront, accuse, or plead. I wasn't collecting leverage yet. I was collecting clarity. She didn't notice. Or if she did, she interpreted it as trust or maturity. I let her. People often mistake silence for approval when it's really disengagement. I remember her laughing one night, telling a story from a trip, waiting for my reaction. I smiled at the right moment. Inside, I felt nothing pull toward her. No need to correct the narrative. No desire to be reassured. The detachment surprised me with how complete it was. That was the internal break. Not a fracture, but a clean cut. Once made, it didn't bleed. It just separated what had already been pulling apart. From that point on, I wasn't trying to save the relationship. I was preparing myself to exit it without chaos. And that preparation didn't require confrontation. It required patience. Patience, I had learned, was power when used quietly. Once the decision was made, the work became technical. Emotional distance gave me room to see clearly, and clarity made everything methodical. I didn't search her things recklessly. I waited for moments that made sense, natural gaps where attention wouldn't be noticed. Observation is most effective when it doesn't disturb the environment. I started with what already existed. Travel confirmations forwarded automatically to a shared inbox. Expense summaries she assumed I skimmed and forgot. Calendar entries that looked official enough to avoid scrutiny, but vague enough to hide behind. I didn't download anything at first. I took notes. Dates, cities, durations. Patterns formed quickly once I stopped filtering them through trust. A friend of mine worked in IT, the kind of guy who enjoyed solving quiet problems. I didn't explain the situation in detail. I didn't need to. I asked a specific question about cloud backups and deleted receipts. He showed me how deleted usually meant unlinked, not gone. I watched him recover a series of expense images that had been removed months earlier. Same hotels, same weekends, same room type selected every time. Trips labeled as 2 days stretched into 4. Conferences that ran midweek somehow required Saturday night stays. Client dinners billed on nights with no corresponding meetings. Nothing dramatic, just consistent. I matched dates against her stories. I didn't argue with discrepancies. I logged them. When something didn't line up, I wrote it down and moved on. The point wasn't to confront her. The point was to understand the full shape of the truth before it tried to change form. The medical test form came later. I found it by accident, or close enough to one. It was folded inside the glove compartment, tucked behind insurance paperwork. I recognized the clinic name immediately because it wasn't local. The date stood out more than anything else. 3 weeks earlier, during a trip she said was tight on schedule. I stood there longer than necessary, holding the paper. Not angry. Focused. I took a clean photo, front and back, making sure the timestamp was visible. Then I folded it exactly the same way and put it back where I found it. Nothing missing. Nothing disturbed. That was important to me. I wasn't trying to trap her. I was preserving reality. By then, I had enough information to predict her movements. Not because I wanted to follow her, but because consistency makes people careless. I knew which receipts would appear and which wouldn't. I knew when her phone would go silent and when it would reappear with a rushed explanation. Observation had replaced suspicion entirely. At home, nothing changed. We still ate dinner together. Still talked about surface-level things. She didn't know she was being observed, and I didn't need her to. My role wasn't to expose her yet. It was to make sure nothing I acted on later could be questioned. Facts don't need emotion to stand. They only need to be complete. When I finished gathering what I needed, I stopped. I didn't dig further. Overcollection introduces noise. I had a clean timeline, verified documents, and corroborated inconsistencies. More than enough. The story was no longer hers to control. I had simply taken the time to learn it in full, without interruption. It was when I separated personal from professional that the situation changed shape. Until then, everything I'd gathered belonged to our marriage. Lies, omissions, patterns that explained emotional absence. But some of the charges didn't belong to us at all. They belonged to her employer. I noticed it while reconciling a statement she assumed I never looked at closely. A corporate card entry labeled client meetings, booked under her name, matched a hotel stay I already had documented. Same dates, same room type, Friday check-in, Sunday checkout. No conference, no agenda, just time. I pulled every corporate expense tied to her travel and laid them against my timeline. The overlap wasn't constant, but it was precise. Weekend stays, premium upgrades, ride shares to addresses that weren't offices or venues. Reports filed late, vague, padded with language that sounded professional enough to pass a skim, but not specific enough to survive a review. This wasn't a moral judgment. It was a risk assessment. Once personal choices start leaning on institutional money, the fallout stops being optional. Companies don't argue. They audit. They don't confront emotionally. They document and act. I didn't need to trigger anything. I just needed to understand where the lines crossed. I kept copies of the expense reports as they were submitted. I noted which ones were revised after the fact. I watched how descriptions changed, client dinner becoming networking event, site visit becoming strategy session, language tightening after the numbers were already locked. I didn't alert anyone. I didn't hint. I didn't move money. I didn't interfere. The integrity of what I had depended on its neutrality. Facts are strongest when untouched. At the same time, I quietly separated our finances. Not dramatically. No closed accounts or frozen cards. I rerouted my income. Adjusted access. Made sure my obligations were clean and traceable. Preparation without provocation. The realization wasn't satisfying. It was sobering. Her choices had expanded beyond deception into exposure. The story no longer belonged solely to the two of us. Other people's reputations, budgets, and policies were now involved. People who wouldn't care about explanations or apologies. I understood then that whatever happened next wouldn't require my participation. Systems were already in motion. All they needed was time and consistency. When I looked at her after that, I didn't see a villain or a stranger. I saw someone standing in the middle of intersecting consequences she hadn't fully mapped. That wasn't my responsibility to explain. I didn't warn her. Warnings create opportunities to edit behavior and narratives. I wasn't interested in edits. I was interested in accuracy. The situation had moved beyond personal hurt. It had entered a space where outcomes were decided by policies, timestamps, and paper trails. I had simply made sure the trail was intact. From that point on, I stopped thinking about endings. I focused on letting structures do what they were designed to do, identify inconsistencies, and resolve them without emotion. All I had to do was stay out of the way and remain exact. The second call came 2 nights later, early enough that it felt intentional. Same number. I answered again without hesitation, already seated, already prepared. His voice was different this time. Less performance, more irritation. He said his name was Tyler, like that was supposed to matter. He said he wanted to set things straight. He talked about respect, about how she'd been unhappy for a long time, about how I should take the loss with some dignity. The insults were more restrained now, sharpened, aimed at competence instead of masculinity. He wanted to establish hierarchy. I let him. I didn't argue. I didn't correct him. I didn't defend myself. Silence has a way of encouraging people to fill it, and he did. He told me where they met. He told me how long he thought it had been going on. He told me things that didn't align with my timeline, which told me more than accuracy would have. When he paused, waiting for a response, I said, "You think you know the full situation?" He scoffed. I could hear the smile in his voice. "I know enough." "That's the part you're wrong about," I said. No edge, no volume, just a statement. I didn't explain. I didn't threaten. I sent him the same photo I'd sent the first time. The medical test result, date clear, clinic name visible. Nothing else. No message attached. The line stayed open. I listened to his breathing change. He didn't speak for several seconds. When he did, his tone had flattened. "What is that?" he asked. "A detail you weren't given," I said. He asked questions then. Fast ones. When was it taken? Why did I have it? What else did I know? I answered none of them. I didn't need to. The information was doing its own work now. reframing his confidence into uncertainty. He said she hadn't mentioned anything about tests, about risks, about being married the way she was. He said that last part like it surprised him. "That's between you and her," I said. "I'm just correcting an assumption." He went quiet again. Not performative this time. Real silence. I imagined him recalculating, replaying conversations, re-examining assurances he'd accepted without verification. That wasn't my concern. I had no interest in persuading him of anything beyond the fact that he hadn't been told the truth. "I need to talk to her," he said finally. "I'm sure you do," I replied. I ended the call without ceremony. After that, I didn't hear from him again. I didn't need closure from that direction. The purpose of the conversation wasn't confrontation. It was alignment with reality, not emotion. Later, I learned he'd scheduled his own test within the week, that he'd asked questions she couldn't answer cleanly, that the version of events she'd maintained required constant revision once someone else started checking dates. I never contacted him again. I never followed up. My involvement was complete the moment the fact was introduced calmly and without commentary. You don't need to expose people. You just need to stop protecting the lies that make their behavior possible. Once I did that, everything else moved on its own. After that, things began moving without my direction. Not quickly, but decisively. I didn't make calls or send messages. I didn't warn anyone or try to steer outcomes. I stayed consistent, which is often all a system needs once the variables are exposed. Her employer initiated an expense audit within days. Not dramatic, just a request for clarification, followed by a broader review once the answers didn't align. Corporate processes don't announce themselves. They simply expand. I watched revisions get flagged, reimbursements paused, explanations requested in writing. Language that had worked casually now had to survive documentation. Tyler disappeared from the picture entirely. I didn't ask how or why. I heard indirectly that he'd taken time off, that he was asking questions of his own, that other timelines were colliding in ways he hadn't anticipated. Truth has a way of spreading laterally once introduced. People compare notes. Assumptions fail under comparison. 2 other men reached out to her around the same time. Not to me, to each other. I learned about it later, after the noise settled. They had each believed they were the only one. Each had been given a version of her life that required exclusivity to function. Once that illusion broke, none of them were interested in maintaining it. I filed for divorce quietly. No threats. No announcements. Just paperwork submitted cleanly and correctly. I requested separation of assets based on documented contributions and timelines. Nothing punitive. Nothing inflated. Precision matters when emotions aren't involved. The locks were changed while she was away. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. Shared access only works when there is shared intent. By the time she noticed, the papers were already in motion. I didn't block her calls. I just didn't answer them. She came home to an emptied space where my things had been removed methodically. No drama. No mess. I'd left what wasn't mine and taken what was. The house felt neutral again, like a place waiting for its next function. When she finally reached me, her voice was unsteady. Not angry. Disoriented. The structures she'd relied on, professional, personal, emotional, were no longer absorbing the consequences for her. She asked to talk. I told her when and where, neutral ground, limited time. By then, I wasn't invested in explanations. I didn't need apologies or admissions. Those are only useful when you're still deciding what to do. I had already decided. Everything unfolded the way systems do when left uninterrupted. Reviews concluded. Access was restricted. Stories changed too late to matter. I stayed out of it and let processes finish what patterns had started. What surprised me most wasn't the collapse. It was how little energy it required once I stopped interfering. I didn't have to destroy anything. I just stopped holding it together. And without support, it resolved itself. When she finally sat across from me, there was nothing left to argue about. The room was neutral, public, quiet, forgettable. No memories attached to the walls. That mattered. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but structurally, like something that had lost its internal framing. She started to speak and stopped. Tried again. I waited. She said she hadn't meant for things to spiral. Said she'd been overwhelmed. Said she never thought it would reach this point. Each sentence arrived without weight. Explanations disconnected from outcomes. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct her. There was no benefit in tightening language that was already collapsing. I told her I wasn't there to review the past. I was there to finalize the present. That seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. She asked if I was really done. I said yes, without emphasis. Finality doesn't need decoration. She asked if there was any chance of slowing things down. I said no. Not because I was in a hurry, but because delay implies uncertainty. I had none. The documents were already signed on my end. I slid them across the table. She stared at them for a long time, as if they might change shape if she waited long enough. They didn't. Eventually, she signed. The pen shook slightly in her hand. I noticed and then stopped noticing. There was no confrontation, no confession, no catharsis, just completion. When we stood to leave, she looked like she wanted to say something meaningful, something that might reassert relevance. I gave her space. She didn't find the words. That was fine. Not every ending needs a speech. Walking out, I felt lighter than I expected, not relieved, exactly, but unburdened. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was stable, the kind that holds. I moved into a smaller place closer to work. Minimal furniture, clean lines, everything accounted for. My routines reassembled quickly once they weren't competing with uncertainty. Morning runs returned to their old rhythm. Work stayed work. Evenings were my own again. There was no victory in it. No sense of having won anything. Just the absence of strain. The constant background effort of maintaining something misaligned was gone, and with it, the fatigue I'd mistaken for normal life. Sometimes people expect anger at the end. I didn't have any left. Anger requires attachment. I had already stepped past that. What remained was peace, not dramatic or profound, just functional. The kind that lets you sleep without replaying conversations. The kind that doesn't require explanation. The ending arrived the way it should have all along. Quiet. Documented. Final. And when it was over, I didn't look back. Later, after the paperwork stopped arriving and my phone stayed quiet, life rebuilt itself without ceremony. I didn't announce a new beginning or make rules about the future. I just lived inside what was real. Work stayed steady. Mornings stayed early. Silence stayed honest. I met someone eventually, not through effort, but through overlap. No secrets to manage. No timelines to reconcile. When she spoke, her words matched her actions. When something didn't make sense, we talked about it while it still mattered. That was the difference. Nothing hidden long enough to grow sharp edges. I understood then that I hadn't lost anything essential before. I had been carrying weight that wasn't mine to carry. Letting it go didn't make me stronger. It made me accurate. People ask sometimes how I handled it so calmly. They expect a lesson or a strategy. I don't give them one. There isn't a formula. I didn't win. I didn't expose anyone for satisfaction. I just introduced one precise fact, calmly, and stopped interfering after that. Truth doesn't need volume. It needs placement. Once it's placed correctly, it does the work on its own. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.